Hi everybody! I wanted to run you guys through a little bit of a walkthrough of how to align things horizontally. And I'm going to show you a couple of different methods, but the first one I want to show you is CSS Grid. It is a little bit more purpose-built method to do horizontal alignment or even vertical alignment than some of the other techniques. So it is something that is good to know. Notice what the rest of the page says. You don't have to use more than one method. You just use the one that works best for you and the one that makes the most sense. So W3 Schools is a great reference for this, but I just want to walk you through the demonstration. So what I've done here is I've set up a little area that has some color on it, just so you can kind of see what we're working with. And here is the code that goes with that. I've set it up div, just a little div. It's just a box, you see? And I classed it demo box, and the CSS for that, if you want to take a look at that, you can look here, and I set it up with 100% width, a 250 pixel height, and then a background color just so we could see things going on top of it. Now underneath that in the CSS I have a small box, which if you look back at the code is here. Now these small boxes are just little divs. Right inside, they are child elements of the demo box, which is the parent element. And all I have done is set them up as little containers. There's nothing in them, so they don't show up on the page at all. And the only thing I've done is apply a background color, which is white. So I am going to show you the boxes. They don't show up yet because they have no dimensions. There's nothing in them. There's no content. There's nothing. So I'm going to show you how that would come into play. So you can certainly put anything in the divs that you want to, but right now it's the divs themselves that are the important thing. So we have to do a couple of things to do CSS Grid. The first thing you have to do is set up the parent container as a grid container. So a parent container is a grid container if you set it up so that its display is grid. So we go over to our CSS Designer panel here, to the demo box, which is the parent container, and you see it highlight there. And we are going to go down under Layout, under Properties, to Layout, and we're going to look at Display. So if we click this, we have a lot of choices, but one of them is not grid. That is not one of the things that Dreamweaver gives you as a preset choice, but you can type it in. So we just go over to our CSS over here. I'm just clicking on the file itself, and I'm going to go down to the CSS from my class demo box, and I'm going to tell it that I want the display here set to grid. Now it does bring it up as one of the drop-down choices, so you can do it that way. So a grid container actually runs the entire width of the page. Now you could do also something called inline grid, which allows you to actually give the grid container itself dimensions. Okay, so notice when I did that, the grid disappeared. What ends up happening, or the reason that happened, is that the containers here, the child containers, don't actually have any content in them, so there's no height there for it to be. So it's still there. If you notice, the div is still there, but it just doesn't have any dimensions at the moment. So let's give so once we've done that, we've gone over here and we've set the display to grid. We need to give it some qualifications there. So what we need, another element that we need to do is we need to type in grid. This, again, W3 Schools will walk you through this. Grid template columns, which is right here. And this is asking you essentially how you want the columns to be measured width-wise. And we want them auto because we want them all even. So I'm just going to do auto, auto, auto. 3 columns, 3 autos. And that is, you've got to have your semicolon afterward. So, and then we can give it some space between the columns, but for right now we will skip that just in the interest of making this short. So what I want to do now is give our small box, which again, if you'll remember, those are our child divs here. I'm going to give them some dimensions because we can't see them right now. So they have a color, but they don't have any dimensions of their own. So I'm going to give them a width of Let's just give them 100 pixels for now. There. So we can already see our grid items. Now, the reason it's doing it this way is I didn't lay a box behind it with stuff in it. I just laid the boxes in the grid directly. So there are our white boxes, right, in that red. It looks like we made pink boxes, but what I actually did was make 3 white boxes. Let me change the background color here so that you can actually see that a little bit better. I'm going to use an RGBA color, and that's this. And notice I can turn down that alpha channel, which makes it a screen. So now you see those are the 3 boxes that I actually created, and then the grid is the solid color behind. Now with these 100 pixel width boxes, I can actually take this width and take it off. The boxes are still there, the 3 columns that we made, but now the boxes are the entire width, so it looks like the whole thing is screened out. So it's interesting because we can do some things with these columns and make them look the way that we want to. So for the first thing is, if you look at the grid template columns, your columns don't have to be equal in size. If you want, for example, the first column that you're making here to only be 15% of the width, you can change that there, 15%, and then auto and auto. And it makes that those columns are now different sizes. It doesn't show up because we don't have any space between them. So what we'll use to do that is we'll put in another CSS property called grid gap. So grid and then hyphen gap. And notice it's showing it here. Now you can do grid column gap and grid row gap separately, but the grid gap command is a shortcut command where the first number is the gap between the rows that you want, and the second number is the gap between the columns. So let's just say we want a 20 pixel gap between the rows and 30 pixels between the columns, and then that's going to show us there's our column gap there. Now we only have 1 row, so it only isn't giving us more rows, but it is showing the 15% size here and then the 2 automatically sized even columns here. So that gives you one method of laying out boxes, and these boxes can contain anything. For example, if you wanted to put this div here, you might decide to put a nav bar in here, right? Let's say that you want a nav bar. Helps if I can type. So maybe you want there to be a nav bar in here, and then you might have a couple of items, and we'll put a dummy marker in there for now. And that would be your home button. And then maybe you have another one that is, we'll just copy paste. Copy, paste, paste. Okay, so maybe you'll have a home and an about me and a portfolio page. So maybe you'll have those 3 in your nav bar, and you would probably want to make them stack horizontally, and that would be all right. Nav bar we'll visit later, but you could have a nav bar on the left and then have 2 maybe pictures, something else, some other kind of content in these two rows here. So there are ways to use this to do layout, and these DIVs don't have to be just single items. You can actually put things inside these boxes in whatever fashion you want to do. All right, so let me just take I've only got a few more minutes in my recording here. All right, so another way that you can separate pages into columns, essentially, is using percentages for width. So what I've done is I've taken 3 image files here. These 3 image files are not actually the same size, which does present other issues, but I'll show you how to deal with those later. And then I put these 3 images into a DIV. So notice the DIV here, and if you look at it on the thing, it's here. See, there are the 3 images, right? And right now they're just stacked on top of each other. And they're inside a container, because my thought is that I'm eventually going to put them so that they're aligned horizontally. So I need them to all be in the same row. So let's take a look at the class that we need to put on these images to make them line up next to each other. So if we look here, we've got class horizontal images. So I need to add that selector, and I will do that. Okay, so now I can actually style the images in this class right here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to add, if you think about what is it that you want this to do. Well, what I really want to do is I don't necessarily want to style this box. I want to style the images inside the box because I need them to be certain sizes so they fit next to each other. So I'm actually going to add to my selector. I'm going to edit this selector. I'm actually going to remove this one and I'm going to change it. I'm going to, instead of doing horizontal images, I'm going to do a tag that is horizontal images and then the images inside that box. So this selector here means that it will only affect things that are tagged as images inside the horizontal images container. So it makes the selector more specific. So I can style other images in my website and this will not apply to them. It has to meet both of these circumstances. So that's what I really want to style, is the images themselves. And what I'm going to do to these images is I'm going to give them a width of 33%. So I'm going to use percent, and I'm going to tell it 33. Because I only want it to have 33% of the available width of the horizontal image container, right? Which fits inside this because that's what it's inside. And then I'm going to tell it, I'm going to give it a height. And normally I would say you don't want to give images height, but in this case I'm going to give it height because my images are different sizes. So you can give it a height of 100% to just kind of make sure that that the images will be the full height of the one. All right, so then I'm going to do two other things. We haven't discussed either of these in class, but this is because what I end up with is this sort of really awkward arrangement where they don't look right. They're just lined up weird, right? So there are a couple of things that I need to do to address that. And the first thing is I really want to add a little bit of padding between these. So I'm going to add about, let's do 5 pixels of padding on the left and 5 pixels of padding on the right. So that is going to give me a little bit more space. But notice what it also did is bumped the other image down here because now I don't have enough room. 33% with that 5 pixels of padding is more than 100%. So there's a way to deal with that too. If you scroll down a little further in your layout, you will notice, oops, not further, higher. So the width, height, this is in the layout tab, right? There's a thing called box sizing here. And this is essentially telling the browser how to interpret the box model. And we're going to tell it border box. That means that anything inside the border is considered part of the content, essentially. So we're adjusting its math so that our padding is actually included in its border calculations. So now when it takes 33%, it includes that 5 pixel margin that we gave. You see the little space here as part of that calculation for 30%. So now we actually are able to just give each of the images 33%. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really like the way it sort of stacks like this, so I'm going to give it one more thing that we haven't looked at, and it's something called vertical alignment. So we're going to go down until we find vertical alignment, which is here somewhere. There it is, vertical align. And we are going to vertically align in the middle. And that will adjust those so that they actually line up in the middle. And so it adjusts to the middle line. And you notice there are other choices. I can align top, which would make them go all to the top of the row. There's a baseline, which makes them sit on the bottom. Middle, you can certainly experiment with some of the other things. So that's a couple of ways that you can actually use grid to stack things horizontally, and then you can use percentages as well. So I will hope this helps a little bit, and I will see you guys in class.